If I had my Honda 2000 from the movie, it would have to be me.
Me, of course.
No doubt. In your Ferrari.
Whatever.
Pull up a seat, because what you think you know about Too Fast, Too Furious is only half the story. Most people remember the pink Honda, the skyline cutting through Miami's streets, and that insane boat jump at the end. But behind every frame of this film sits a layer of decisions, accidents, rivalries, and pure coincidences that the average viewer never gets to hear about. This was not a smooth production. It was a film that almost fell apart before cameras ever rolled, that reinvented itself under pressure, and that somehow delivered one of the most entertaining sequels of the early 2000s, despite being built on a foundation that kept shifting beneath everyone's feet. 25 facts. One film. And by the time we reach the end of this list, you are going to see Too Fast, Too Furious in a way you never have before. Let's go! Before a single scene was written in stone, Universal Pictures went after the one person they believed the film could not survive without. Vin Diesel was offered $25 million to reprise his role as Dominic Toretto, which at the time represented one of the most substantial paychecks offered to an action star for a sequel appearance. The number was not a rumor. It was a real, documented offer placed on the table with full studio backing. Diesel read the script, weighed the opportunity, and walked away. His reasoning was not about the money. He felt the story lacked the heart and ambition of the original, and he believed that attaching himself to a weaker project would damage the reputation he had worked to build. What followed was a complete restructuring of the film's identity. Paul Walker stepped into the center of the story, and Brian O'Connor became the sole anchor of the sequel. Interestingly, Diesel later admitted in interviews that walking away was a mistake, and that he wished he had stayed and pushed for the changes from the inside, rather than abandoning the project entirely. That admission says a great deal about how the industry works and about the kind of regret that comes with hindsight. Roman Pierce did not exist in the original vision of this film. His character was created specifically because Vin Diesel refused to return, and the studio realized they needed a dynamic presence to stand beside Brian O'Connor if the film was going to function emotionally. The writers developed two separate versions of the script simultaneously. One version assumed Diesel would change his mind and return. The other version introduced a brand new character with a shared history with Brian, someone whose relationship with him had enough tension to drive the story forward. That character became Roman Pierce, and Tyrese Gibson was brought in to play him. What made the casting particularly effective was the pre-existing relationship between Gibson and director John Singleton, who had worked together previously. That familiarity translated into an on-screen chemistry that felt lived in and natural rather than manufactured. The rivalry, the humor, the genuine affection underneath the bickering, none of that would have existed if Diesel had simply said yes. Roman Pierce became one of the most beloved recurring characters in the entire franchise, and he owes his very existence to a contract negotiation that fell apart. Universal Pictures announced that John Singleton would direct the sequel. The reaction from film circles was one of genuine confusion. Singleton had built his reputation on deeply personal, socially conscious storytelling. His debut film, Boys in the Hood, had earned him Academy Award nominations and cemented his place as one of the most important voices of his generation. Street racing sequels were not part of that conversation. But Singleton brought something to the project that a more conventional action director never would have. He understood car culture not as a spectacle but as a community. He had grown up around it. He had experienced the streets, the gatherings, the hierarchy, and the language of that world firsthand. He pushed hard for Southern hip-hop to define the film's soundtrack, moving away from the electronic and rock-influenced tone of the first movie. He insisted on location authenticity. He made Miami feel like a living environment rather than a pretty backdrop. And he did all of this while navigating the additional challenge of making his very first PG-13 film, balancing edge with accessibility in a way that required careful judgment at every turn. The Nissan Skyline GT-R R34 that Paul Walker's character drives through the film has become one of the most iconic cars in franchise history. What most viewers do not know is that the car did not belong to the studio. It was the personal property of Craig Lieberman, who served as the film's technical advisor. Lieberman had purchased the vehicle in 2001, before the sequel was even officially greenlit, and it held a distinction that made it genuinely remarkable. It was widely recognized as one of the first legally registered R34 GTR models in the United States, a car that was not officially sold in the American market and required a complex importation process to bring in legally. The studio approached Lieberman and rented his personal car for production use. Paul Walker never owned that specific vehicle, despite years of fan belief to the contrary. Additional R34s were later imported from Japan to provide backup units for the more demanding scenes. But the one that appears in the film's most memorable moments, the one that launched 1,000 desktop wallpapers, was a private citizen's personal purchase that happened to be in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. As extraordinary as that previous fact is, this one might genuinely disturb car enthusiasts. There was a serious internal push at the studio level to replace the Nissan Skyline with a Dodge Neon SRT4. The reasoning was straightforward from a marketing standpoint. The Neon was an American car, accessible and familiar to domestic audiences, and Dodge had an interest in the kind of visibility that a major studio film could provide. Craig Lieberman pushed back hard against this proposal. His argument was that the Skyline carried cultural weight that the Neon simply could not replicate. It was rare. It was imported. It represented exactly the kind of aspirational, enthusiast-driven car culture that the film was trying to celebrate. Replacing it with a mass-market domestic sedan would have fundamentally changed what the film was saying about its world and its characters. The studio ultimately sided with Lieberman, and the Skyline stayed. But consider for a moment an alternate universe where Brian O'Connor pulls up to the starting line in a Neon. The entire visual legacy of that character, and arguably of the franchise itself, might have gone in a completely different direction. Devon Aoki was cast as Suki based on her screen presence, her look, and the energy she brought to the audition. There was one detail, however, that emerged after the casting decision had already been made. She did not have a driver's license. She had no meaningful driving experience at all. For a film built entirely around car culture and racing sequences, this created an immediate logistical challenge. The production arranged driving lessons that had to be scheduled around her filming commitments, meaning she was learning an entirely new skill while simultaneously preparing for and appearing in scenes. The pink Honda S2000 her character drives became one of the most visually distinctive cars in the film, partially because the color choice was bold enough to make it impossible to miss in a crowd of vehicles. Aoki committed to the learning process and delivered a performance that audiences responded to warmly. The interesting footnote here is that this situation was not entirely without precedent. Other performers in the franchise had faced similar gaps between their personal driving abilities and what the roles required of them, and the production had developed a system for bridging that gap relatively efficiently. The lavish waterfront estate, used as the home and operational base of villain Carter Verone, was not sourced from a location agency's standard catalog. The property belonged to Sylvester Stallone, one of the most recognizable action stars in cinema history. Located in Coral Gables with views overlooking Biscayne Bay, the estate carried a physical grandeur that communicated everything the production needed to say about Verone's wealth and power without a single line of dialogue. The home's architecture, its scale, and its relationship to the water all contributed to the atmosphere of a man who had placed himself beyond the reach of ordinary consequences. The choice also created a quiet piece of film history trivia that sits beneath the surface of every scene shot there. Two major action franchises connected by a single piece of real estate. The proximity to Vizcaya Museum and Gardens, a location that has appeared in several other notable productions, added another layer of cinematic history to the neighborhood that most viewers drive through without recognition. Eva Mendes, who plays undercover agent Monica Fuentes in the film, made a deliberate and significant creative decision during production that most people have never heard about. A romantic scene between her character and Brian O'Connor had been written into the script, designed to establish a closer emotional connection between the two leads. Mendes advocated strongly for its removal. Her reasoning was rooted in character consistency. Monica had an established relationship with the film's primary villain, Carter Verone, and a romantic moment with Brian at that stage of the story would have required an emotional leap that the screenplay had not adequately prepared the audience to make. The scene would have felt rushed, and it would have undermined the careful balance Monica needed to maintain as a character navigating dangerous territory on multiple sides. The director agreed with her assessment, and the footage was cut. The decision was the right one creatively, and it reflects a kind of thoughtful engagement with the material that goes beyond simply showing up and delivering lines. Mendes understood her character well enough to protect her, even when the script did not. The search for the right actor to play Tej Parker was one of the most drawn-out casting processes in the film's production. Director John Singleton initially wanted Ja Rule, who had a small role in the first film, to return in an expanded capacity. The offer made to Ja Rule was reportedly in the region of $500,000. He declined, expressing a belief that he had moved beyond what that character could offer him at that point in his career. The search then moved to Redman, who expressed genuine interest, but had to withdraw due to conflicts with his television schedule. Even 50 Cent entered the audition process, adding a level of competitive pressure to a search that was already taking longer than the production timeline comfortably allowed. When Ludacris came in, the decision resolved itself quickly. His timing was instinctive, his energy was specific rather than generic, and the way he inhabited the character's combination of street credibility and warm humor felt immediately right. The franchise found one of its most durable supporting characters through a process that had almost gone in several completely different directions. Andre 3000, at the time one half of one of the most critically respected hip-hop groups in the world, also auditioned for the role that became Tej Parker. What makes this fact particularly memorable is the candid way he has discussed it in retrospect. He has openly acknowledged that he was nervous during the audition, that his performance did not reflect his actual abilities, and that he would not have hired himself based on what he delivered in that room. That level of self-awareness and honesty is unusual in an industry where public image management tends to smooth over moments of personal failure. The fact that Andre 3000 could have been a central recurring character in one of the most commercially successful film franchises of the last 2 decades and simply had an off day in the audition room is a reminder of how much chance and circumstance shapes the outcomes that later appear inevitable. Ludacris became Tej Parker. Andre 3000 became a footnote in the casting story. Both men seem to have made their peace with how it unfolded. The opening race sequence, which ends with cars launching across a drawbridge in mid-rise, was not a visual effects construction. The production executed it practically, using real vehicles on a real bridge that was actively being raised during filming. The timing requirements were extraordinarily precise. The stunt drivers had a window measured in seconds to hit their marks correctly. Too early, and the jump would not have the visual drama the scene required. Too late, and the angle would be completely wrong, potentially making the footage unusable, or, more seriously, creating a safety situation that the crew could not control. The logistics of coordinating a live stunt on a functioning piece of municipal infrastructure with a camera crew, safety personnel, and multiple vehicles all operating simultaneously is a level of production complexity that tends to get underappreciated when the final result looks clean and exciting on screen.